The effects of phototropism. March 23rd, 2018, Class 2B.
Good morning, scholars. Our experiment is focused on the reaction, which is phototropism. For those that may be unfamiliar with the concept, allow us to give you a brief rundown on what exactly phototropism is. First off, the definition of phototropism is the orientation of a plant or other organism in response to light, either towards the source of light or away from it. But in this case, it's only towards the light. This is because the plant needs sunlight to undergo photosynthesis, so it grows towards the light. The growth of a plant toward any stimulus is called tropism, and the growth of a plant toward a light stimulus is called phototropism, since photo means light. Plants perform this with the help of the chemical signal auxine that will be further explained in our post-lab question section.
The problem of this experiment is Is a nervous system a requirement for learning? Hypothesis. If a plant receives light from a certain angle, then the plant's stem will bend towards the light because the auxin that is diffused allows for cells to grow faster, as there is an increase of the auxin hormone on the shade side. Experimental design. Independent variable. The exposure to light every day. Dependent variable. The angle the stem grows when exposed to light. Control. The plant in the dark. Constants. Types of plants. Temperature. Soil type. Light and dark exposure. The materials used in this experiment were 2 small potted plants. We used zonal geraniums, 2 shoe boxes, cardboard, scissors, tape, water, and permanent marker.
For the procedures, the first step is to cut out a large hole at one end of the shoebox. Hold the box up to the light and be sure to tape up any other spaces where light could shine through. Then, cut 2 pieces of cardboard in the following sizes. Make both pieces half the width of the shoebox, then make both pieces the same height as the shoebox. Now divide the box into thirds and tape one of the cut out pieces of cardboard on the left side of the box at the 1/3 mark. Next, tape the other cardboard piece to the right side of the box at the 2/3 mark. Place a small potted plant in the shoebox opposite to the hole where the sun is shining through. Make sure the plant is well watered before you put it in the cardboard box. Close the box, tape it, and place it in a sunny window. In about 3 to 4 hours, open the box and notice and record how the plant grows in the direction of the light coming from the hole.
Looking at the data table, we see the experiment being recorded every 10 hours for 30 hours. For the most part, the control plant is consistent and lingers around at 90 degrees. However, the experimental plant placed inside the shoebox with the angled light decreases at a constant rate. In the first 10 hours, it goes from 90 degrees to 82 degrees. After 20 hours, it goes down to 75 degrees. And lastly, after 30 hours, it reaches 71 degrees. The trends that can be identified in the data is that the control plant is mostly constant throughout the experiment, while the experimental plant is ever changing. This is because the control plant was placed in a shoebox with no light whatsoever. Another trend in the data is that the experimental plant's decreasing in degrees signifies that it is in fact bending. This bending ultimately shows phototropism at full effect as the plant bends over to maintain a sufficient flow of light. The results in the experiment do support the hypothesis. This can be seen in how the plant bends in a direction to sustain satisfactory flow of light into the plant, which is required in order to perform photosynthesis. The reason why this occurs is because of the phytohormone called auxine. A higher frequency of auxine can be located on the plant's opposite side of the source of the light. This causes the cell walls to break down, ultimately elongating the cell walls. Due to the elongation of the cell walls, the plant bends to one side and becomes longer than the other. This movement of the plant concludes that plants do have the learning capacity even without a nervous system. To create a more reliable experiment, more trails would have been beneficial and a greater amount of time for the plant to grow. To conclude the presentation, let's move on to the post-lab questions. The first question we are going to address is to identify the hormone that is responsible for the behavior measured. The hormone responsible for this form of tropism is auxine. As stated previously, auxines can cause the elongation seen in phototropism, but there is also another hormone called cytokine, which aids in the process of elongation. The second question asks to identify the structure and cell type responsible for secreting this hormone and describe how the cells responded to accomplish the behavior measured. The auxines are produced in the stem, the buds, and the root tips. The type of cells that produce auxine are somatic cells. This is known because somatic cells are responsible for growth. This also applies to the cytokines because they serve the same purpose as the auxines. The specific cells responsible for the secretion of cytokines are immune cells, endothelial cells, and stromal cells. Auxines are the mobile chemical signals responsible for a plant bending toward light in their environment. But its main role is to work with cytokines to stimulate elongation of the stem. Cytokines is the hormone responsible for cell division, which is needed for the elongation. In addition, when auxine levels increase, roots form, and when cytokine levels increase, shoots form. Now for the comparison with the two podcasts, a connection between the experiment we conducted and the Smarty Plants podcast is that plants have the ability of learning. For example, in the experiment, it can be seen that the plant bent towards the light in an attempt to adapt to its environment, which can be considered learning. In addition, in the experiment conducted in the podcast, it would also show a sign of learning from the plants. The experiment conducted was when the scientists made two trails in which the plant's roots could grow towards either water or away from it. The results of the experiment were that 80% of the time, the plant's roots grew towards the water, showing that those plants learned as well. And a connection that could be drawn between our experiment and the From Tree to Shining Tree podcast was that plants use chemical signals to not only adapt to their environment, but also to communicate with other plants. In both situations, we can see the plants using hormones to adapt to their environment. In the podcast, we can see the trees using chemicals to alert other trees whenever there is danger. For example, in an experiment when a tree was given radioactive gas, the radioactive gas was spread out between all trees so that the one tree wouldn't die.